might like to offer my thanks to all faculty members of Economics Department of both the colleges, and especially to Professor Shyamol Bandyopadhyay, Head of the Department Economics, Dhruba Halder College, convener of this webinar, and Professor Pulok Chakraborty, Head of the Department Economics, Nabagram, Hiralal College, joint convener of this webinar. Special thanks to Dr. Joydev Mishra for his sincere effort to organize this webinar, and Devkanti Das and Soumyadip Das for their technical support. I am very much grateful to our distinguished speakers, Dr. Bhaskar Goswami, Associate Professor, Department of Economics, University of Burdwan, and Dr. Debashish Mondol, Associate Professor, Department of Humanities and Social Science, IIT Delhi, who have agreed to deliver their valuable lecture in this webinar. I am very much thankful to them. The webinar is focused on key priorities to discuss practical measures and actions and to develop opinion to thoughtfully address the present crisis arising out of pandemic due to COVID-19. The present webinar is very much relevant at this time. The spread of COVID-19 has affected almost all spheres of human life, physical, economic, and emotional. We are all navigating through the series of lockdown. The economy of the country are grappling with this unforeseen crisis, and we are trying to mitigate several challenges.
Sir, sir, perhaps you have muted yourself. We can't hear you.
Sorry. Good afternoon, honorable speakers, respected principal of Nabagram Hiralal College, teacher, dear students and distinguished participants. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to today's webinar on policies to fight COVID-19 pandemic issues and concern, organized by Department of Economics, Dhruba Halder College, in collaboration with Department of Economics, Nabagram Hiralal College, and IQAC of both the colleges. Firstly, I would like to offer my thanks to Dr. Srikanto Samanto, Principal, Nabagram Hiralal College, who have motivated and acknowledged the encouragement of faculty members of Department of Economics of both the colleges to jointly organize this webinar. I might like to offer my thanks to all faculty members of Department of Economics of both the colleges, and especially to Professor Shyamol Bandyopadhyay, Head of the Department, Dhruba Halder College, Economics Department, and convener of this webinar, and Professor Pulok Chakraborty, Head of the Department, Economics, Nabagram Hiralal College, joint convener of this webinar. Special thanks to Dr. Joydev Mishra for his sincere effort to organize this webinar, and to Devkanti Das and Soumyadip Das for their technical support. I am very much grateful to our distinguished speakers, Dr. Bhaskar Goswami, Associate Professor, Department of Economics, University of Burdwan, and Dr. Debashish Mondol, Associate Professor, Department of Humanities and Social Science, IIT Delhi, who have agreed to deliver their valuable lecture in this webinar. I am very much thankful to them. The webinar is focused on key priorities to discuss practical measures and actions, and to develop opinion to thoughtfully address the present crisis arising out of pandemic due to COVID-19. The present webinar is very much relevant at the time. The spread of COVID-19 has affected almost all spheres of human life, physical, emotional, and economic. We are all navigating through the series of lockdown. The economy of the country are grappling with this unforeseen crisis, and we are trying to mitigate several challenges. We hope, like every other crisis, we'll ride this tide, adapt ourselves, and come out stronger. I hope that the webinar will be profitable to all of the participants and the next few hours will be enjoyable and fruitful to everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, we are proud to introduce respected Principal Professor Srikanto Samanto, Principal of Nabagram Hiralal Pal College, to share few words with us.
Good afternoon, everybody. I must begin by expressing that it's a pure bliss and delight that our national webinar on policies to fight COVID pandemic issues and concerns is being organized by the Department of Economics, Dhruba Halder College, in collaboration with my college, Nabagram Hiralal Pal College, Nabagram Konnagar, Hooghly. So, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I extend heartily my good wishes to Dr. Satyabroto Sahu, my principal colleague, Dhruba Halder College. I warmly welcome Dr. Bhaskar Goswami, Associate Professor of Economics, the University of Burdwan, my alma mater, Dr. Devashish Mondal, Associate Professor, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences in an Institute of Technology, New Delhi. I also welcome both the conveners of the webinar, Professor Shyamol Bandyopadhyay and Professor Pulak Chakraborty. Dear participants, friends, and colleagues from across the country. Under the looming shadow of the pandemic, COVID-19, when all the stakeholders of higher education, students, teachers, academic administrators, scholars, and the like are confined in home owing to nationwide lockdown, that the Department of Economics, Dhruba Halder College, feels ardently that it's a part of our social and academic pledge to take certain initiatives to enliven the academic milieu in a single way. The pandemic is looming large, from Wuhan to New York, from Sao Paulo to Mumbai, from across the spectrum of the globe, and the epicenter of doom to the metro. So far as the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic are concerned, the major sectors, two major sectors are the worst sufferers, the education sector and the economy. Economics is the base, all other is superstructure, as the great philosopher has put it. People across the globe have lost their lives, lost their jobs, and jobs are getting lost every day. I think it's the duty of the policy makers of an economy how to recover from and to fight the effects of the pandemic. The economies from across the globe are being impaled on the horns of a dilemma as to how to get rid of such crisis. Professor Amartya Sen suggests that nations should develop infrastructure facilities, and Professor Abhijit Vinayak Bandyopadhyay, on the other hand, is of the opinion that direct supply of cash money to the worst sufferers will embolden the economic activities. I think by their thoughtful deliberations, both the resource persons will address the issues and concerns and benefit the participants at large. Namaskar, welcome everybody.
Thank you very much, sir, for your inspiring lecture. Now, I like to call Professor Shyamol Kumar Bandyopadhyay, convener of this webinar.
Joydev,
Yes, sir.
please request few of our participants to mute their audio and video. Many of them are opening their video.
Okay.
It will be problematic when the speaker will deliver lecture. Tonima Niyogi Sinaroy, Chopon Kumar Gupta, many of them are there. Manohar, Lila Bandyopadhyay, many of them are.
Okay, okay. Respected participants, it's our humble request to you.
And
Please
WhatsApp. I am
keep
requesting
your
them in chat WhatsApp, but they are not
please
attending.
keep your audio and video mute so that we can smoothly walk through this webinar and get some experience regarding this COVID pandemic issues.
Puro Dasgupta.
Now I like to request our head of the department, Professor Shamul Kumar Bandyopadhyay, convener of this webinar, to share a few words with us.
Thank you, Joydev. Good afternoon. Dr. Satyabroto Sahu, Principal of Dhruba Halder College, Dr. Srikanto Samanto, Principal of Nabagram Hiralal Pal College, Honorable Speaker Dr. Bhaskar Goswami, University of Bardwan, Honorable Speaker Dr. Devashish Mondal, IIT Delhi, my colleagues of Department of Economics in Dhruba Halder College and in Nabagram Hiralal Pal College, participants and students. You are all welcome to this National Webinar 2020 on policies to fight COVID pandemics, issues and concerns. We know that there are several webinars which are going on, which are being organized by several colleges and universities on several issues related with COVID pandemic 19. But at this time, this college, my college, Dhruba Halder College, and in collaboration with Nabagram Hiralal Pal College, we have thought to throw some light on some other effects of this COVID pandemic, particularly the economic effects of this COVID pandemic on common people. We know that India, along with other countries, is also battling with COVID pandemic. And as a result, we are going through a prolonged lockdown process. The lockdown measures in India have tremendous economic costs in the form of loss of output, income, and employment in the economy. They have impacted both the demand conditions and supply potential of the Indian economy. Keeping in mind the tremendous hardships suffered by the common people during the lockdown and after, many economists have suggested an urgent need of further increase in government expenditures to mitigate the distress of the people and resist the imminent necessary tendencies in the economy. However, increasing government expenditures against the backdrop of a possible expected decline in revenue earning may finally result in a huge fiscal deficit in an untenable level for a developing country like India. During the lockdown period, state governments have also incurred huge revenue losses. Government stimulus measures have also not paid much attention to the fact of compensating state governments for their revenue losses. The state governments are finally responsible for citizens' welfare on the ground. Therefore, deterioration in their fiscal positions is a big concern, especially when several states are already debt burdened. This seminar, we hope, will attempt to throw light on the fiscal policy choices of the central and state governments in India to deliver benefits to its citizens in the present crisis scenario and simultaneously attempt to explore the possible options to sustain the growing fiscal deficit. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Professor Swapan Kumar Bormon, I will request you, please don't share screen and keep your audio and video mute. Someone is speaking and some songs are, you are listening some songs or something like that in a webinar. So it's my request, please keep your video, keep your audio mute, please. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Shamul Kumar Bandopadhyay. Really, we are walking through a very dark phase of life, and we don't know how to move from this dark COVID era to a very bright post-COVID era. Only we are in a position to remember Rabindranath Tagore, কষ্ট যদি দাও হে প্রভু শক্তি দিহ সহিভার. And how can we gain our strength? How can we generate some policies to come over this pandemic? For that, we have two of our resource persons. First of all, I like to call upon stage Dr. Bhaskar Goswami, Associate Professor of University of Bardhaman. Let me to introduce Professor Goswami. As a student of Department of Economics, Calcutta University, he has obtained his doctoral degree under the guidance of Professor Soumen Sikdar and Dr. Rajendra Narayan Nag. His interest areas related to macroeconomics, development economics, and financial economics. His works have been published in lot many journals like Journal of Economic Integration, Global Economic Review, Trade and Development Review, Studies in Agricultural Economics, Journal of Economics and International Finance, Financial Innovation, Foreign Trade Review, Contemporary Economics, and also in various edited volumes. Professor Goswami is a member of the team that prepared several district human development reports of West Bengal. He has a teaching experience of more than 10 years at undergraduate level and more than 10 years at postgraduate level. Professor Goswami, now the platform is open to you.
Thank you, Dr. Mishra, for those nice words. Good afternoon to all. Respected Principal Dr. Satyabroto Sahu, respected Principal Dr. Srikanto Samanto, Convener Professor Shamul Bandopadhyay, greetings to all the members of the organizing committee. My personal greetings to my co-speaker, Dr. Debashish Mondal of IIT Delhi, and my dear participants. Let me begin with the seminar. Hopefully I have 30 minutes of time to do justice with these huge burning issues that are coming up nowadays. But nevertheless, I would try my best to cover my talk within these 30 minutes and do fair amount of justice to Dr. Debashish Mondal. Now, on the part of the organizers, I would have a humble request to all the participants to kindly mute your microphone, don't share your screens, don't put your video on because that distracts a lot, and also the transmission data gets disrupted. So thank you in advance to all the participants for your cooperation. Now, let me begin with my topic. The topic that we have for today's webinar is how to fight the COVID pandemic and what are the issues and concerns we face. First of all, I would like to focus on the issues and concerns that have popped up in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. Now, having said that, let me say that the issues and the concerns as of now is not complete yet. Okay, with each passing day we find new issues coming up, we have new concerns coming up. So the story is not yet complete. The picture is not yet full in our perspective. We don't have the full picture of what this pandemic has cost us or what is going to have in store for us. So whatever thing that we have as of now, or whatever issues and concerns we have as of now, so I would be restricting myself on these issues and I'll try to suggest or pinpoint some policies to overcome the issues and concerns that we so far have faced as of now. Now, to begin my talk, I have an analogy of hello, Apanna Mondal, dear participant. Please mute your microphone. Hello, Apanna Mondal. Hopefully, you can hear me. Please mute your microphone. Okay, thank you. Let me begin with an analogy. Analogy is that the house is on a fire. If someone's house is on fire, what we do? What is our reaction? The first and the foremost reaction is that we try to save our lives. We try to save our lives. We try to save the lives of the family members who reside in this house. So this is the first and foremost reaction if a house gets fire. Caught fire. And the second response is that if we have time, chance, and scope, we try to rescue or bring out some valuable assets like papers, money, credit cards, ATM cards, so on and so forth, gold, ornaments, whatever it may be. So the second response is dependent on the time and the chance we have to enter the house and bring out those valuable possessions. So that is the second response if a house gets caught fire. And the third response, again, provided we have time and scope, we would try to bring out our memorable things and objects which are very precious to us, which has some materialistic value or which has some emotional value or sentimental value or whatever it may be. So these are the three different reactions if one of our house is in fire. The pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, is a similar sort of situation. The houses of the citizens are on the verge of getting fired. I mean to say, a fire is ready to break up in every citizen's house. So, what would be the natural reaction? So, the first response is to save our lives, save the lives of our countrymen, our citizens. How to do it? To save the life of the citizen, the only policy is that we have is to flatten the pandemic curve. Now, the flattening of the pandemic curve is very often used nowadays. What does it mean? It means that as of now, the peak of infection, of the contagion spread of this COVID-19 virus is on the rise for the Indian context. So, lockdown, complete isolation and a lockdown is the only way out to flatten this pandemic curve. Okay, and now there are basically there are three broad objectives of a lockdown. One is that lockdown helps to stop the spread of contagion because as we all know that this COVID-19 is a very contagion sort of virus. It gets infected, people get infected when they come in close contact with one another. So one objective of lockdown is to bring isolation among the society, among the civil society, such that this COVID-19 does not spread so easily. So that is number one objective of lockdown, and we have witnessed a lockdown history of more than 100 days. Everywhere in the globe, everywhere in the world, all the countries have followed this lockdown. Now, second objective of a lockdown is that this pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, has given us, or we witness a lack of health infrastructure, because the health infrastructure that we have as of now, and if this virus spreads rapidly, the health infrastructure that we really need. So there is a gap between what we have and what we need in terms of health infrastructure. So the lockdown period effectively is meant to bridge this gap of health infrastructure that we need and what is available right now. In fact, I am tempted to cite an example of a particular country which very effectively bridge this gap of available health infrastructure and targeted health infrastructure. And the country is South Africa, one of the country which by all means is lower than the Indian in terms of HDI, in terms of GDP, in terms of GDP per capita, whatever economic indicator you can choose. The South Africa is definitely below India. But nevertheless, a striking achievement of South Africa was that it was very much able, successfully implemented the gap between the targeted health infrastructure and the available health infrastructure. And the third objective of a lockdown is that to utilize the time period of the lockdown for R&D purpose, such that we have a vaccine ready very fast, because that's a need of the hour. So this was the three objectives of lockdown that are supposed to be followed by all the countries. In the Indian context, what we have seen is that to be very honest, in the Indian context, all the policymakers and the leaders at the initial phase did not took it very seriously. In fact, we underestimated a lot regarding the potential danger of this COVID-19 pandemic. And as a result, I can clearly remember our Prime Minister addressing the nation on 23rd or 22nd March, I may be wrong on the exact date, that it's a lockdown for 21 days. It's a 21 days war. After 21 days war of lockdown, everything would be as normal as it was. But it didn't happen. So that sort of statement by the national leader clearly shows how underestimated the potential danger, underestimated the danger of this COVID-19. So we as an Indian citizen, we went for a lockdown. But the second two objective of lockdown, that is the bridging of the gap of infrastructure and the R&D for COVID. R&D, by R&D I mean research and development for development of COVID vaccine. These two things clearly did not happen. And as a result of which we have a very high rate of infection, and we are in the third position in the infection cases of this COVID among the global, which is not a very good sign at all. Now, this is the first reaction when a house gets caught by a fire. Now, the second priority. So the first priority is to save our lives, and that we can do by flattening the pandemic curve, and that can be only done through lockdown. Along with the lockdown, the bridging of the gap between health infrastructure and the R&D in medicine and pharmaceutical industry. The first part was partly implemented in the Indian context. The latter two objective was grossly mistaken, was grossly overlooked by our national leaders. Anyway, now the second priority, if we have time and scope, we can, as I said, if a house is in a fire, we can bring out the valuable financial assets and rescue them. And going by that analogy, the valuable asset, as to me, is our workers, is our laborers in the economy, who is really the backbone of the economy. Okay, so the second priority of the lockdown, or the issues or the concern, is to provide a better or as the same livelihood status that they used to maintain prior to COVID-19 pandemic broke out. Okay, so how can that be achieved, or what was the government response or reaction to that? Let's focus on it one by one. Now, before I go to this loss of livelihood of the informal sector workers, especially because we belong to our organized job workers, where our job is relatively more or less secured, so we are less impacted, better to say, by this COVID-19 pandemic. the real impact of this COVID-19 pandemic were the informal sector workers. As the stories unfold, as event unfolds, we have seen a horrible plight of migrant workers walking down, cycling from their places to their native villages, and that's a really pathetic, horrible sign. The government did not have any policy. There was a gross mismanagement of the informal sector workers. Let me be very fair to that. Now, coming to this point, I have yet another analogy to depict the condition of the informal sector workers. Suppose I have a house and the government planned to build a bridge or a railway track that would come across, that would overrun my house. Okay, so in the public interest, the government can acquire my land or my house and destroy it and construct a flyover or railway bridge or whatever it may be. But in that case, the government is bound to give me a compensation, because a right to property is a fundamental right according to the Constitution. So if right to property is a fundamental right in the Constitution, then right to livelihood is a corollary of this right to property. Now, the informal sector workers did not lose their job of their own or the mistake of the employers. Since government announced a lockdown policy, so they were forced to be laid off and they become unemployed. So the onus of giving compensation to these workers rest on the government, be that central, be that state government. Unfortunately, it's very, very unfortunate that till today, no compensation has been given to the jobless workers of the informal sectors. This is really not wanted. In contrast, let me give you another picture of the global country, which is a capitalist country like UK, England. There, the picture was quite similar. Lots of informal workers lost their job, and these informal workers are still today given a compensation by the government. Just look, the government is giving them a compensation in terms of cash transfers, not the private entrepreneurs. So, if a capitalist country, the so-called capitalist country of UK, can follow this sort of policy, then the very legitimate question is that why can't our government follow the same type of policy? I don't know the answer. Really, I don't know the answer to it, but it's very disheartening that our government is overlooking the plight and the plight of the jobless workers of the informal sector. Now, so far, there has been a competition of food rationing given to this class of workers who have lost their job because of COVID-19 pandemic. This competition is very good competition on the state and the central government, who would be giving more rationing, who would be effective in more rationing. But the fact is that the ground reality is that still today we see that some community kitchens are run by some NGOs and some other political associations or whatever it may be. So if these community kitchens are still run today, this bears testimony to the fact that the food rationing is not enough. Just because the food rationing or the quantity of the food provided through rations are not enough, people are queuing up in this sort of community kitchens. So that's a sign that we have more to do, the government have more to do, more to offer in terms of food rationing. So the food rationing is a welcome move, but still the magnitude and the dimension has to be scaled up, which is not so much higher as of in the present situation. Now, along with this food rationing, what we need is direct cash transfers to the jobless workers, because apart from food, we really need cash for our day-to-day activities, be it health checkup, be it the education. Nowadays, of course, it's an online education. So whatever it may be it vaccination, be it whatever thing we can think of. So we need cash. The most so the jobless workers do need cash. So direct cash transfer is also needed, but none of the government as of now have implemented this cash transfers. So that is a lacuna area we need to focus on in the coming days. Now, how can there has been a debate of how this cash transfers would ultimately reach the beneficiaries. There are definitely some modus operandi or way out of it. If time permit, I can just touch upon it. We call it in our technical term as helicopter dropping of money, in the sense that the RBI is going to print money and the government is going to drop those money to the beneficiaries, to the jobless workers. And how to identify the jobless workers, because as of now we don't have a very good database, and whatever database we have, there are some leakages in the database, we all know that. But nevertheless, if the policies are sound, we can really look for this direct cash transfers. We can effectively use this direct cash transfer tool to reach to the marginalized workers, and we can do it through the way of elimination. I mean that we can eliminate the persons stage by stage, and ultimately come to a residual amount of the population who are in dire need of this cash. First, we can eliminate the salaried person who files income tax return. Then we can eliminate the population who have some sort of who file corporate tax or business tax under GST, so on and so forth. And the rest would be the population who don't have any tax returns or who don't file any tax return. And it would not be a bad idea to judge that they are the deserving needy or the deserving beneficiary of this cash transfer. So if there is a way out, the government can definitely think of this cash transfer policy apart from food transfer. Okay, so these are the two responses that we need to follow. First is that we need to save our life, and that can be done through flattening of the pandemic curve. And the second priority or the second response is that we need to flatten the economic recession curve, the recession that we are right now facing. Okay, now speaking of economic recession, let me go back or walk back some few years down the line. Indian economy in the post-demonetization period was facing a demand deficiency. Okay, and the demand deficiency got amplified after the implementation of GST, and this phenomena continued till the lockdown was announced. So the Indian economy is clearly marked by a demand deficiency, and the lockdown that was imposed on the Indian economy added to a supply constraint. In fact, lockdown is nothing but a disruption in the supply chain. So we have a demand deficient economy. Along with that, now we have a supply constraint economy. So it's a classical case of supply constraint Keynesian equilibrium, and this equilibrium is very bad. Okay, so we are caught in a bad level equilibrium trap, and this equilibrium, I would prefer to call it as supply constraint Keynesian equilibrium. In fact, this word has been coined by one of my sir at ISI Kolkata, Professor Dipankar Dasgupta. So we face a supply constraint Keynesian economy equilibrium that we have out now. How to overcome? What are the policies that can get rid of this crisis that we face right now? Now, to me, since the crisis is still evolving, it has not finished yet. So the policies that I'm going to say right now is not exhaustive, okay? Because each and every new day, something new issues and concerns come up. And as a response to that issue and concern, we may have or we might need some different policy measures. So since I have said in the initial phase of my talk that the picture is not yet complete, so on a basis of a half picture, I'm suggesting this policy. And when the pictures gets completely cleared, more meaningful policy measures would come up. Definitely, it's going to come up. So the policy that I would suggest to come out of this crisis situation are a blend of fiscal and monetary policy. Now, by the blend of fiscal and monetary policy, I would mean that I would mean two things broadly. One is that the government needs to pump up its investment radically. There should be huge expenditure, government-sponsored expenditure on the wanted things of the economy. I'll come to it a little later. And the RBI, at the same time, needs to print money if they run out of their money, of the money state stock. So this is the broad blend of fiscal and monetary policy that I have in my mind. Now, so far, our finance minister has announced a fiscal stimulus package of 20 lakh crore rupees. I'm not going into the details of it, whether that's sufficient or not, whether that's enough or not, or whether actually that is the claimed amount or not, or much less than that, 10% of GDP or 1% of GDP. That is a debatable issue. I'm not going into details of it. But what is very, very obvious from the fiscal package was that the government tried to ease out the supply constraint without focusing on the demand deficiency. The government always, through its fiscal package, tried to lower the rate of interest, make loans available cheaper to the business houses, to the small and medium scale industries, such that they take up their production activities in full swing. Now, this, I would say, is the misjudgment of priority. The government did not prioritize the things very nicely. In fact, there is a mismanagement. I'll give an example why there is a mismanagement in the priority of the government. Now, in this situation, if I'm a businessman, if I'm offered a loan, sanction of a loan of let's say 1,000 crores of rupees or whatever it may be, with a very low rate of interest, simply I would be taking the loan and be sitting on it, because I won't take up new fresh projects. I would not be taking new investment, because in an uncertain time, when my demand is not that much secured, I don't have any focus of my business, I would not venture into my production activities. So we know from the investment theories that one of the crucial factors of investment is the business environment. So as of now, we don't have that business environment. So if you give a loan, soft loans, if you offer soft loans with low rate of interest to the business houses, they would be simply sitting on those loans, would be taking those loans and would sitting on it. They won't be going for a fresh investment, new projects and so on and so forth. So that won't help the Indian economy any further. So the government gives priority to the ease of the supply side bottlenecks, but completely ignored the demand deficiency part of the government. The problem, as I feel, is in the demand deficiency. The demand needs to be boosted. Then only you can give a supply impetus for the businessman. Because nowadays the business, the production activities of the economy are sitting idle on an excess capacity. There is the capacity of the production houses are lying idle because the environment is not there for production. So there has been a very sort of mismanagement of this fiscal stimulus package, I would say, and if the central government recognize this mismanagement, the earlier the better for the Indian economy, because the problem really lies on the demand part of the economy, not on the supply part of the economy. Because the supply part of the economy would remain this sort of standstill, stagnant supply side unless and until we overcome this pandemic, COVID pandemic. Okay, so unless and until this entire pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic gets over, there would not be any sort of normalcy in the economy. So But still, people have to live on their livelihood. So the demand part of the economy is right now is very crucial, and for that, the government needs to transfer cash directly to the most needed population. Okay. Now, what I find is that when I say this thing, when I argue on my point, when I place my point, there has always been a counter argument of saying that what would be the fiscal deficit then? The fiscal deficit would be so high, how the government can tackle, and since the revenue collection is very low, so there has been a lot of issues regarding fiscal deficit. My take on fiscal deficit is that please don't worry on fiscal deficit. We also, as an individual, go for a deficit when you feel when you have a crisis. God forbid, if someone in my house gets infected or faces a serious diseases and that needs some thousands and crores of rupees for his or her treatment, I would beg that money from anyone to get his or her treatment done. So begging is nothing but going for a deficit, going for a burden, debt burden. So that's nothing wrong in it. So fiscal deficit is not an issue right now. And if you want to have this issue of fiscal deficit, then I would have another counter argument. As of now, the global crude oil price is the lowest, running some in the range of $20 to $21 per barrel. Okay, but in the Indian context, the price of petrol and diesel are skyrocketing each and every day, and the major share of the hike in the price goes to the government, be that state government or the central government, as taxes. So government revenue in terms of taxes on this petroleum product are all-time high, but at the same time, it's also true that the consumption of these petroleum products, due to this disruption of economic activity, is at all-time low. So if you just do some cost-benefit analysis, the government is definitely having a shortfall in its revenue collection, and but at the same time, the government is not passing on the benefit of lowest crude oil prices to the citizens. Okay. So in that case, the government is having a revenue generation through this higher price in oil, petrol and diesels. Okay. The second factor of higher deficit that once government thought of is to hike the corporate taxes. Very unfortunately, the government rolled back the hike in the corporate taxes. Which is really unwanted, because a corporate tax of in the tune of 20% would mean a lot of fund in the government exchequer, but that did not happen. And if I am not mistaken, there was a group of IRS officer, Indian Revenue Service officer, who suggested to put a tax on super rich. By super rich, they meant the billionaires of our country. Okay, if the super rich are taxed according to those IRS officials, if the super rich are taxed or their tax slab is hiked by, let's say, 2% to 5%, there would be a huge pool of money coming into the government exchequer. But unfortunately, that did not happen, and it came out in the social media that those recommendation of those IRS officers was not well accepted by the government things. Okay, and if you are really, if the government are really worried about the fiscal deficit, then I'm going to put a question to the government officials or whatever it may be. How come you get so much money of erecting statues or building temples or going for fairs and so on and so forth? Is that not a wastage of government money? Is it really wanted? Still today, the government or the state or the central government has allocated crores and crores of funds for Kumbh Mela or something like that. So if you are really concerned with fiscal policy, that should not have come to the government mind. So fiscal policy, take it from me, is not an issue right now. The issue is how to save the lives of the citizens, how to provide for greater health infrastructure, and how to reduce the burden of misery of the jobless workers in the informal sector. And the policy is very simple, is food come cash transfers to the jobless workers, to the poorest section of the people, through the government organizations and so on and so forth. So that's my take for today. Thank you for your patience hearing. I'm ready for any questions and answers after my co-speaker ends up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your very lucid and inspiring, insightful ideas regarding policies to fight COVID pandemic. There are a few questions, so we will discuss those questions after the lectures of Professor Debashish Mondol. Now I like to call upon stage Professor Debashish Mondol. Let me to introduce Debashish. Debashish is teaching economics in IIT Delhi. He is an associate professor there in the Department of Humanities and Social Science. He joined IIT Delhi in the year 2010. Dr. Mondol's area of expertise is in macroeconomics and economic growth. Dr. Mondol completed his master's and PhD from Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata, under the guidance of Professor Manus Ranjan Gupta, and his thesis has been recognized and honored by the Exim Band in the hands of Professor Kaushik Basu. Prior to his ISI journey, he did graduation in economics from Ramakrishna Mission Vidya Mandira, Belur Math. His postdoctoral research was from National University of Singapore during 2008-2010, and there are many Elsevier and Springer journals where Debashish has expressed his ideas. Dr. Mondol's research interest is in the areas of structural change and labor productivity growth in India. Why India's GDP growth rate is so low? Why has India fallen behind China in the last 3 decades? What are the sectors that dragged India behind, and what are the sectors that pulled India up in the productivity and economic growth? These are some of the main questions of his current research. I like to call upon stage Professor Debashish Mondol from IIT Delhi. Debashish.
Thank you. Professor Joydar Misra, for your kind invitation as well as introduction. Before I start, I try to answer myself as if I'm playing with a dummy player. So no, I'm trying to share my screen where I have written down some of the possible burning question over this pandemic and the related economic impact of this pandemic. And then I'll also show some of the comparisons with how our country is being fared with the rest of the world, specifically China. Also, in passing by references, I will talk about some other countries' experience as well. By training, we are specifically, I'm macroeconomist, so I'll talk mostly about the macro variable impact and what have been our experiences so far, specifically with reference to the financial crisis in 2008. I think that's the most recent comparable figure we have at present. Now, if I share my screen, can all of you see my screen now? Professor Mishra, can you confirm me?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. So now I'm thinking that what could be the possible question in the current time? So my one possible question is, how do we analyze the pre and post pandemic scenario with regard to global economy and with respect to Indian economy? Are we still better off than rest of the world, say USA, Europe, or China? Now, my answer would be, it's a very brief and sketchy answer that I tried to write it down before I participated. So in my view, India has done remarkably well so far in terms of managing the pandemic. So if you look at the contagion risks the amount of spread so far, the counterfactual is that what would have been the impact had India not locked down this country at time last week of March. So in that sense, India has done quite well, though we are ranked third in world in terms of the aggregate spread, the confirmed cases. But I think we are doing quite well. India was growing at a very high rate during 2014 and 18. I think those of you who read economic-related news, say Economic Times, Financial Times, like that, you must be aware of the fact that we were one of the fastest growing emerging country, even surpassing China during 14 to 18. I have some figures to match to this claim. We were roughly growing at 7.3% per annum, and even China was doing around 7%. But we are lucky that only those 5 years were the span. I'll show you that in most of the cases, China beat us in terms of the aggregate growth rate of the country. Now, the major plus point for a country like us is that we are much less integrated to the rest of the world in terms of trade of goods and services. So if we take the trade to GDP ratio, that's a little higher in India compared to China, because our GDP is less compared to China. But if you look at the world trade share, India is roughly around 3% compared to China's 17%. So you can say that we are almost six times behind China in terms of export and import compared to what the entire world is doing. Now think of the entire world is shut down because of this pandemic. It's a very non-brainer to understand that India will be less affected compared to the other integrated countries because of trade restrictions, because we are less integrated, right? So we will be affected, but it will be less compared to at least China. Many of you might remember that China is also regarded as the house of world manufacturing activities. So if they can't sell their manufacturing goods in the rest of the world, of course they'll be hit hard. So obviously India's development is far more dependent on domestic economy, good rainfall and agriculture, and external shocks are important, but not that great relative to the rest of the world. That said, any recovery in the Western world should have a positive impact to us. Those of you who are linked also track or look at the market, you see that anything happens in New York, the next day, those things are mimicked in Bombay Stock Exchange. So we will be affected either positively or negatively, depending upon how the world is being raised up. But that elasticity will be muted. Now, other point, if we look at from the past 2008 crisis, which is, all of you know, it's called financial crisis. Now, India jumped the growth rate by doubling it in 2009 and 8. I think it was in 8 we were down by around 3.5%. The growth rate of the Indian economic GDP was around 3.5 to 3.8. But then in 2009 we more than doubled it, and then we continued it in 2010 also. So we continued to grow at a higher rate thereafter. So IMF, and World Bank, I think many of you might have heard the recent news that they're projecting aggregate GDP will contract, so the growth rate will be negative. But we may come back almost doubling it in the next 5 years or so. Even by, I think it will be in less than 5 years. But look, I'm talking of the aggregate economic impact. It's the aggregate GDP. If you look at the small portion of this, which is reflected by the stock market activity, 25th March, India hit the lowest of it. Both the Sensex and Nifty went down almost 30 to 40%, but it has come back. And expectation is that if you're on the right track, given that the vaccination is developed by scientific discovery, then we can be able to double up our GDP growth rate in less than 5 years' time. So overall, I think India would do well compared to the rest of the world in terms of its economy. My second hypothetical question will be, how do we differentiate between, say, global financial crisis of 2007-8 and the current pandemic? And hence, if we can differentiate, can we have the same control mechanism to mitigate this crisis as done in global financial crisis? Now, my take will be, I think the current economic recession is different in nature compared to 2007-8. I think those of you who had some training in economics, you know the first chapter in microeconomics, specifically the chapter on asymmetric information, talks about the crisis in 2008, because the informational asymmetry was one of the prime reasons behind the fall of the Lehman Brothers. Like, we don't know what the other side is doing, and hence we act in an uncertain time based on our possible guess, and the contagion effect will be much more larger, and the aggregate financial system will be at stake. So, but compared to the financial crisis, the current one is of course having a financial crisis, but that is led by also health crisis. So even by terminology, this is health plus wealth, and the earlier one was pure wealth. So it is much more severe compared to 2007-8. If you take the corresponding macro variables, you will see that things are spanning out over time, and this pandemic is going to be much more severe than at least 2008-9, if not compared to the 1930s Great Depression. So since health and wealth are related in this pandemic in terms of measure of control, we at least from the economic point of view, we have standard government machinery of fiscal and monetary measure. So I think this is an exogenously imposed economic crisis that we are going through. So the health-related issues, and then we exogenously imposed the lockdown, and that led to the financial crisis. So the earlier one was endogenous, because in 2008, the system was so uncertain and over-risky that led to a crisis of financial and investment system. Now, just after the financial crisis, world had to deal with immediate credit crunch. So, in any crisis, you will see that the credit is not there. The liquidity is less in the economy, and hence the immediate response will be you inject money in the system. And how do you inject money in the system? You reduce the rate, you reduce the bank lending rate, and the benchmark of that is the repo rate, at which Reserve Bank of India lends to the rest of the banks. And we had, in the world level, we have the quantitative easing coming after 2008 in a very big way. Many people thought that why not, money supply is linking to the inflation. But those of you who are trained classically, still in our time, I remember we read macroeconomics from Ackley's book. Sometimes we are referred to from Ackley's book. We know that aggregate money supply, if it goes up, it leads to inflation, but that is not happening. In fact, I have some of the figures to show you where the inflation in the world is going down from 2000, say, 10, 11 time. And partly because we are moving toward a asset-based economy compared to commodity-based economy. So my view is that we consume more of mobile phones, say, laptop, some of the technical other goods, and of course we consume food, but the commodities and assets are different in nature. So the more we are in the asset-based economy, the impact on money supply, on inflation has to be reworked again. So overall, I think the policy rate cuts across the world and quantitative easing, where government inject money supply by purchasing long-term securities from the open market. Now, in terms of fiscal support, if you track the last crisis, China spends nearly 12 to 13% of GDP in 2018 and 8 and 9 to tackle the global financial crisis. And I can tell you, they were a winner. After the comeback in 2008-9, they were almost the leader in the entire world in terms of the growth rate of the economy. So for India, we were less affected in 2008 because of our lack of exposure to the rest of the world, because of the, as I told you earlier, that the share of trade is very less. But we still, the measure that we have taken in terms of reducing the lending rate and injecting more liquidity into the system are very similar also in this pandemic. So the Reserve Bank is doing the right thing of decreasing the repo rate and making it easier for the bank to take quick loan and then also disperse it. But many people who are also knowing these things, know that how much these rates are transferred. That's a research question. But assuming that things are on the right track, that's the only policy we can think of at this stage. In terms of fiscal and monetary control measure, we have to differ in terms of response because it's a health as well as wealth. So our package should be much larger. I think I'll talk about that in the next question. Also, there should be some production-related incentive. Labor reform should be tacked with economic measure because manufacturing is highly affected now, as our previous speaker, Professor Goswami, alluded to, that manufacturing, things are almost sitting in idle. So there has to be something called production-related incentive so that you don't run in excess capacity for all the time. The third hypothetical question will be, will the monetary stimulus given by RBI and fiscal by the government, which is roughly measured by the common media that it's around 21 lakh crore, boost our ailing economy? Is it really 10% of our GDP? Now, is there focus more on demand side or supply side? What and how should it stimulate the economy? So that's my hypothetical question, and my take will be, yes, technically that 21 lakh crore is around 10% of economy. In fact, when I was first listening our Honorable Finance Minister public conferences I think if I remember it was in the last week of May, I was trying to count out, okay, many people talk about Indian economy to be around $3 trillion economy, and our Prime Minister saying that we want it to $5 trillion. And here we are talking about 20 lakh crore. Then I was thinking, okay, that was in terms of international dollar, and this is in Indian rupee, and dollar and rupee is around 75 in that range. So effectively, Indian rupee, in the rupee terms, this is around 20 lakh crore. The package was announced, and technically it's correct. I think Professor Mishra also has written down that decomposition between how much RBI is injecting and how much is government injecting. But a lot of the spending is in terms of credit guarantee scheme. MSME's credit, they are saying that you please take loan. You don't need to cover with any guarantee scheme because we are giving you free loan. Of course, you have to pay the interest, but you don't need to cover up with any guarantee. I think many of the private and as well as public who have taken loan, we are covered by moratorium. There is a recent case against in the Supreme Court, if you remember, that talked about interest on interest, whether that should be charged or not. Then Supreme Court last is saying that it's a business, so banks are also doing business. So please don't talk about all these interest on interest issues in the court. But effectively, that's the way the money is being injected in the economy instead of cash being given. But I'll talk about that in my next paragraph. It's very difficult to give cash also because what will be the implementation mechanism? So yes, they help in boosting the supply side of the economy because you are giving a subsidy to the capital because investment is part of the capital and investment is part of partly coming from the bank loan. So however, in the demand side, by directly giving people money is another way for the stimulus to work. Now, note that when we get into this paralyzed situation, it's both demand and supply shock. So on the one hand, supply curves shift down because nobody could operate the machine because of lockdown. Capitals are and labors are mostly complementary in economics. I'm not saying that they're always complementary, but mostly. So if the capitals are down, the labors are also down because we are not able to join our work. So both L and K is going down. You think of a simple production function of Douglas type, you see why the output is also going down because it's a mixture of capital and labor. So both demand and from the demand side, in fact, I should tell you that demand was already in recession from 2018-19 because one of the major data that tracked this demand slowdown is the rural per capita household consumption expenditure that was going down even before the pandemic started. So demand shock was already there in the economy. coupled up with that supply shock, we are in a different lower level equilibrium. Now we need both the measure to pick it up. So on the supply side, we are doing right. On the demand side, if we come up with some innovative measure, we can do this. But from the demand side measure, what will be the right policy intervention? One thing what Professor Goswami also talked about is giving direct cash. But we need to think of much more innovative way to transfer cash to the system. Mahatma Gandhi employment guarantee scheme is one. Can raise the wage. Whether that wage rise is sufficient, I don't think that's a debatable issue. But definitely that's one way to do that. Then recently, Pradhan Mantri Rural Youth Employment Yojana is also having some investment. So we can do some of the innovative tricks to raise the demand side of the economy and get out of the pandemic. Now, that's one way to think of the recent issues. The other part that I want to discuss with you or share with you is the comparison between how India and China came to this stage. So the pandemic started in late December. So you can think of the impact will be dependent upon what did you build yesterday and what you are going to sow, and then you are going to reap the corresponding benefit tomorrow, right? So let's see the yesterday. So the historical data, you will see the first one is the annual GDP growth rate of India and China over, I think this is 10 years. So I was quickly preparing this because I know that many students are also listening, and this will be good to start comparing between at least the other emerging countries that we often talk about. We can also add up Brazil and Russia, for example, the BRICS group of countries. But specifically looking at China's GDP annual GDP growth rate and India, you see China most of the time is above us, the dotted curve. Of course, we beat China in several occasions in the last 10 years, but mostly, it's the winner of the China. But in 2020, if you remember, China refused to give any GDP estimate. They said that we don't want to go for any estimate. And in India, we are having several estimates, but most of us think that it will be contracting in 2020. So it's a very bad news. But also, we know the upside of it will be more than doubling it in future, very recent future. Now, if you extend this figure over the last 25 years, you will see China convincingly beaten us in terms of the growth rate. And that's why, they are much more powerful in economic front. And not only we are talking about them, but also some of the global developed countries are also talking about it. Look at their per capita income growth rate, GDP growth rate. They're almost 8, hardly gone below 8, except the recent, after 2012. But recently, between 2014 and 18, we beat them. But in 2019, 20, both of the countries are going to suffer. So that's the very preliminary figure to look at the base. So China was growing very high compared to India, and it's likely that China will contract also much more than India. So if you throw something forcefully from very high, it will go much deeper compared to if you throw something from less distance. So I think the corresponding bounce back effect will also be predicted from this past economic growth rate. Now look at the inflation rate in China and India. This is mostly in the last 10 years data. We are at par with China, at least in the recent 5 years period. So the inflation is the blue line is for India, and the black dotted line is for China, and the axis for them is the right hand side. This is the China's axis to measure, and the left hand side is the India's axis to measure. So I think inflation, we should not worry much. So in case of, to support the earlier take also, that why should we worry much about fiscal deficit? because one of the possible impact is on inflation. But we are not, inflationary in the recent historical, in terms of the recent historical data. So if you look at our from 2018 onward, the blue curve, India's curve, we are around 2% and here around 4. We gone up a little bit, around a little bit more than 6, but again we are going down. So inflation, it's I think from 2014 onward we are tracking it through CPI, a consumer price index. We should not be much worried about inflationary impact of government spending, because our peer groups are also very much comparable to us. And the other is the repo rate, which is the repurchase rate at which RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, borrows from the securities of the commercial banks and then hence distribute loan. We are reducing it. So the blue line and the corresponding reference point in the left-hand side values, the blue line, we are continuously decreasing it, slightly upside here, and then look at from 2019 onwards, in several quarters, our lending rate is hitting around 4, the benchmark lending, the repo rate. I think if some of you are tracking this and also teaching in the class, you know that the Monetary Policy Committee of RBI decides that. And so the rate is very less compared to what it was in 2016 and 2015. In fact, China's lending rate is even less, because this is the axis for China's figure to measure. It is a little bit above, I think, between 3, I think a little bit above 3.8 here, but we are doing very well. It's a synchronized move, I'll say, between emerging countries. If you pull the other countries also, you'll see how the similarly related countries are trying to having built up the system in the last 2-3 years. Now, look at our trade exposure. This is current account to GDP ratio. Those of you who have some training in macroeconomics, this is y is equal to c plus x plus g and x minus m. So this is the x minus m over y. So our current account, if you see the blue bar, the dark blue bar are for India, and we are mostly in deficit because this is the negative figure. So 3% and then roughly more than 4% trade deficit that India is running as a percentage of GDP. Whereas in China, if you look at the dotted black curve measured with respect to the right-hand side axis, vertical axis, they are trade surplus country. So their export is more in terms of value than their import. So that's one of the primary difference between two major countries in the world, emerging countries in the world. So I think if anything, this lockdown is doing that it's going to expose more those countries which are more integrated to the rest of the world. Now, what about debt to GDP ratio? So debt, by debt I mean the amount we borrowed as a percentage of GDP, and this is government debt. So we are at a higher side. But look, we are mostly stable. So in 2010, around 65% of the GDP was government debt, and today in 2019 it's around 70%. 69.62 is the India's debt to GDP ratio. But look at China. From 2010 to 18, the massive government investment was experienced from this figure. So basically this figure is telling that almost 50% of government debt to GDP ratio today in China compared to what was 33% in 2010. So it's a massive government investment, borrowed investment that led to this remarkable rise of government in China. Now you can ask a quick question: why can't we, raise the government debt to GDP ratio? Why don't government spends more? There, I'll say that okay, what is our tax to GDP ratio? I think it's around 12% is the tax to GDP ratio. So our revenue side is limited. Now only 2% of Indian people pay tax. That's according to the standard official statistics. So it's very difficult to have a fiscal room because you can't increase tax, though you can talk of wealth tax and other things, high rich tax, but it's difficult. So the other policy measure we have to reduce the repo rate from 4 to maybe 2 by injecting more money, but that's the policy call taken by the policymakers. And the last one I want to show the investment rate. India is consistently down compared to China in terms of how much percentage of your income you save, and hence you invest in terms of capital formation. China, roughly on average, invest 40% of their income. So if you know those some of the people who are attending this webinar, if I ask you how much you save as a household, I hardly think of more than 25% to 30%, and that's what this figure is saying. So this curve for India, which is the orange one, it's showing that we are roughly on average of 30% of our income is saved, and that's being transformed into capital formation. So if we can raise this by policy, we will be able to come up emphatically from this pandemic. So I think this is what is in my mind. Instead of going to the exact policy measure, what policy makers are thinking, and I thought to give some background behind it, that how different things are fair in terms of our peer group comparisons, and we have space in both fiscal and monetary wing to raise the spending and to come off as a winner. Of course, compared to our recent past, but also compared to the rest of the world, what they did in other recession times. So with this, let me stop, and I'll be very happy to take up your questions. And also, I think I'm doing almost right in terms of my time given to me. So I'm stopping here and open to Professor Mishra now.
Thank you, Devashish. Would you please stop your screen sharing?
Yes.
Okay.
Finance is somehow ignored because state government has not received anything in terms from the fiscal package from the government, but they have lost revenue for at least 2 to 3 months on the state GST. So this is the area of concern for me, because if the state government, which are the institutions will implement all policies on the ground, if they are running short of funds, the whole implementation process will be in jeopardy. The state finance will have to be given more priority things. Is that fiscal deficit? I know that fiscal deficit will have to be increased, and there is no reason to be afraid. But the concern of increasing fiscal deficit is not that it will increase inflation or it will increase in debt for the short term or increasing other things, other problems that people are saying. But the problem is that you cannot implement your own policy for the benefit of your own citizen now. Once you have become the member of an international, when you are living in a world of near capital mobility. So that was my first question. But can we actually increase fiscal deficit in the era of globalized finance?
Okay, let me take up the first question from Dr. Vijit Pathak. Thank you, sir, for your question. The fact is that you are missing out the complete picture, sir. Fiscal deficit is rising not only for India, it's rising for all the countries that are facing this pandemic. Every countries are increasing their fiscal expenditure to cope up with this pandemic. So if you think that, if you think in isolation that India is the sole case who are worried about increasing the fiscal deficit, that's not the true picture. So capital flight and keeping fiscal deficit a compulsion is really not the event as we are facing today. Every countries are facing a hike in their fiscal deficit. So
but those are the countries who have Those are the
Yes.
countries who are the suppliers of international finance.
Okay, sir. Let me put it. Okay, I got it. I got your.
They are not the recipient; they are the suppliers of international finance.
I got your question. Let me give you now the capital flight. Whether there is an inflow or outflow of capital, it depends only on the discrepancy between the domestic rate of interest and the foreign rate of interest. What we are doing right now, what the Indian government is doing right now, is to lower the rate of interest through the cut in the repo rate. So, if the Indian rate of interest, is the domestic rate of interest is lower than the counterparts in the other countries, quite evidently, you won't put your wealth, you won't put your money in the Indian asset. You would be looking for foreign assets. So capital flight is not because of hike in fiscal deficit. It's because of a continuous decrease in the rate of interest, domestic rate of interest, vis-a-vis the world rate of interest. So that explains the capital flight, not the fiscal deficit. And I think the rest part goes to Dr. Devashish Mondal.
Yeah, I think I have heard this question clearly, and I also response. So,
Obhijitda, would you please mute yourself? Obhijitda.
Thank you, sir, for your good question. Now, I think there are many reasons of capital flight. Of course, it's related to the interest rate differential and on our linkage with the global financial system. But briefly, there's a classic take of capital flight in terms of the institutional, other non-market event, the way the institution as a whole perceived by the rest of the world, ease of doing business is one of these things. So it's very, if you are looking only the implication of fiscal deficit and its impact on capital flight, I think that's only one single window and the entire scene there. So I would think that since the interest rate differentials are narrowing down, that risks are not much. In fact, if you look at the data, the FPI and FDI inflow has, of course, reduced during the recent 3-4 months of the pandemic, but now FPI are coming back to the market. And if you see the recent FDI flow in some of the Indian corporates, specifically in Reliance, you'll see that one kind of indications that it's not that our country is looked down upon because of the risks that in future our fiscal deficit will go up and hence let's get out from this place because there's a high risk of raising inflation and hence the real interest rate will be less. That's not the case to my mind. So there's a huge interest to our country, the market, and specifically the domestic market in India. Our economy is mostly driven by the domestic economy side. About the other part of your question, I think that's very substantial because the power given to the states is very limited. So the amount of fiscal responsibility given in a country like India is, state doesn't have much space to do in that case. You have to rely upon centers, the amount of revenue coming from center. No one can always debate that in future one might think of giving more power to the state in terms of managing its own fiscal. But whatever fiscal deficit you generally talk about, it's both state plus center taken together. So if some of the states are doing great in terms of expenditure, the competition between states will come into picture. So it's a very interesting and fascinating issue. But, at this stage, giving more money to the state to deal with the recent pandemic is a very prudent policy measure. That's my view.
Thank you, Devashish. Next question is for Professor Goswami from Dr. Sutopa Chakraborty. Dr. Sutopa Chakraborty, are you there? Dr. Sutopa Chakraborty, are you there? Okay.
Yes, I'm there. Yes.
Okay. Your question, please.
Actually, I want to ask a question, a very simple thing. I'm basically from philosophy, but taking interest in this particular topic. My question to you is, do you think that the mere transfer of cash to which you refer to, I'm placing this question to Dr. Goswami. So, my question is, do you think that mere transfer of cash to the jobless people of the country will settle their issue of insecurity to livelihood? Because I think that this is only a temporary solution. Because I mean to say partially
I got your question,
agree to
ma'am.
your point.
I got your question, ma'am.
Okay.
The fact is that I did not, at any point of my deliberation, say that it will be a permanent policy. It's a sort of step-gap measure to tide over the crisis, the present crisis. When we are back to normal situation, normalcy, we don't require such direct cash transfers to the jobless because there won't be any jobless workers at that point of time. So it's the cash transfer is for the interim period unless and until we move back to normal situation. That was my take. Very simple. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, I want to ask. I want to add one more point, maybe to Professor Mondal also, or to you also, Professor Goswami.
Okay.
I think the way Professor Mondal said about the stimulus to work, and in that, if sharing of cash, transferring of cash to these jobless people who are not having job at this point of time, will that make, the stimulus to work very, workable? I mean to say, on that break there, the stimulus to work, if we, if we give them very easily, if we, or very directly we give them cash to,
We got your question, ma'am. We got your
Okay.
question.
Okay,
What
thank
you said that, or what you are harping at, or what you are apprehending is that if you go for direct cash transfers, then that would act as a disincentive to work when you are back to normal situation. Am I right, ma'am?
when they will be in the normal state, then they will
Right.
that they will lose their stimulus to work.
Okay. That's what we call it as disincentive for work. But madam, the real scenario, the ground reality is not like that. Suppose a jobless worker, when they were working, used to get some, let's say, 10,000 rupees or 15,000 rupees per month. But we don't expect government to give out 10,000, 15,000 rupees per month as a direct cash transfer. So the direct cash transfer amount is always has to be less than what they used to get while they were working. So there is always a wage differential which is going to act as an incentive to go for work. I'm not saying that they should be offered the same cash transfers as of their last pay package or whatever they used to get. So that's not an issue at all. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. I will request the respected participants, please ask single questions so that we can accommodate more questions from another participants. Next question is from Dr. Joba Pal Chatterjee. Jobadi, are you there? Joba Pal Chatterjee, Professor Joba Pal Chatterjee, are you there? Okay. The question is for Professor Bhaskar Goswami. The question is, how far the employment in MG NREGA program solved the problem of demand constraint?
No, I'm not asking of employment in 100 days work or something like that. Without 100 days work, what I'm wanting to say is that there should be a direct cash transfers, whether they are working in MREGA or not. And that is purely a temporary crisis period. That was my take. Whether it would go through different government policies or not, that is not a deep issue at all. So what is an issue is that they should be handed out some cash apart from food. So that was what I wanted to mean. Hopefully she got my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Gautam Chakraborty. Professor Gautam Chakraborty, are you there? Okay, the question, it hasn't been mentioned for whom, but the question is there any government policy regarding the survivability of very small industry with 10 to 15 workers under this COVID period?
As of now, I'm not aware of any such policies. I think my co-speaker, if he has anything to elaborate on this, he can please.
No, I also think any particularly directed policy on this issue is not there, but there is a MSME case, right? The MSMEs are falling under the question that Mr. Chakraborty has asked here. So with less than 10 workers and very small industry, I think maybe less than 10 crores turnovers per year fall under MSME, and hence they can take easy loan from the government. So that's the only thing about survivability. But I don't know the impact, the true impact of this will be, because many people are suspecting the huge amount of NPA in future. Although I'm not pessimistic about that, but that's the common perception about this policy.
Thank you, Devashish. There are many questions. Actually, let me to pick one of them. One is from Professor Jyotirmoy Chakraborty. Are you there? Professor Jyotirmoy Chakraborty.
Hello. Yes, yes, I can hear. Hello.
Okay, your question, sir.
Yes. Actually, I wanted to ask Bhaskar sir, Professor Bhaskar sir. Okay. Hello.
Please go ahead.
Actually, you were talking about in your discussion that that is public expenditure, that is in the form of government direct benefit transferred to the household directly. So my question was like that: how long it can be sustained as a solution for you looking over this disease, the intensity or the scale of the disease? It is increasing day by day.
I got your question. Let me. Okay.
Yes.
Do you have any further thing to say?
Yes.
Okay. Look. Yes.
You just answer. I can say. You
I
can
can
say.
hear you.
Sir, you can say.
Okay.
You can say your. Yes.
Okay, whatever you said is that regarding the time dimension of these measures, because as we look on, this it happens to be a prolonged phenomenon. How can this government can sustain such cash transfers, even I would say the food transfers for such a prolonged period? But you see, there is no shortcuts. How prolonged the long period would be, we don't have an answer yet. As long as we are not coming to a normal situation, these things are nothing but the support system of the government, of a welfare government, to the citizens of the country. The government basically should be a welfare government, and they should look after the welfare of the people. Now, the people are in a miserable state. So long they live in such a miserable state, it is expected that the government should do some welfare measures for the citizens. That's it. We don't have any time deadline that this food or the cash subsidy would continue for next 6 months or 1 year or 2 years down the line. We don't have any answer to it. But what I would say is that, and what should I insist on it, is that as long we are not back to the normalcy, the government should keep in his mind that it has some welfare role to play in this sort of crisis situation. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, sir. One thing, just short thing. I want to add or ask: is there any side effects of continuously subsidizing kind of or?
Professor Chakraborty, you are not audible, and we are running short of time. If you please excuse us.
Okay. Sure.
Okay. And the next question and last question is from Rajiv Bhattacharya. Are you there, Professor Rajiv Bhattacharya? Okay. The question is for Dr. Goswami. Can you throw some light how the government can think of monetizing this cash transfer scheme? Because already we have a fiscal deficit problem that may lead to future debt crisis.
No, that has been addressed.
Actually, that has been addressed.
That has been already addressed by my co-speaker, Dr. Mondol. That has been well taken up by him. So, as I also insisted that fiscal deficit right now should not be a cause of concern. The cause of concern would be to provide minimum support of livelihood for those jobless workers. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much for these nice, insightful lectures, both of the speakers. And now I like to request Professor Mousumi Sarkar, Assistant Professor of Nabagram Hiralal Pal College, to deliver his vote of thanks. Mousumi, are you there? Mousumi, are you there? Okay. Then I will request our convener, Professor Shamul Kumar Bandopadhyay. Please, sir, please deliver your vote of thanks.
জয়দেব একটু দাঁড়াও, ও মনে হয় ইয়ে করছে।
Okay.
Bishan is asking you to wait for Mousumi.
Okay, sir. Okay. Sorry for miscommunication. Mousumi, are you there?
না, মনে হচ্ছে কোনো মিসকমিউনিকেশন হয়েছে।
I think Vishanda.
Jaydev, there is miscommunication. She is telling that it is written Mousumi Manna.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm extremely sorry. Professor Mousumi Manna from Assistant.
She's Mousumi. Shamuna can give vote of thanks.
Okay. I will request Professor Shamul Kumar Bandopadhyay to deliver his vote of thanks.
Thank you, Jaydev. Good afternoon once again to everyone. And we have arrived at the last session of our national webinar 2020 on policies to fight COVID pandemic issues and concerns. And we are passing through a serious sessions of discussion on COVID pandemic, its issues and concerns also. And we have learned a lot from our eminent speakers, Dr. Bhaskar Goswami and Dr. Devashish Mondal. Thank you, Dr. Goswami, for your resourceful analysis of COVID pandemic, its issues and concerns, and several other economic aspects of these COVID pandemic issues. Thanks to Dr. Devashish Mondal for your lucid presentation of the present crisis of COVID pandemic, its economic issues and concerns. We, as participants in this seminar, there are so many participants, we are now very much enriched with your discussion. Therefore, I I convey my thanks to Dr. Goswami and to Dr. Devashish Mandal once again. My thanks to Professor Dr. Satyabrat Sahu, Principal of Dhruba Halder College. Thanks to Dr. Srikanto Samanto, Principal of Nabagram Hiralal Pal College. Thanks to Professor Pulak Chakraborty, Head of the Department of Economics, Nabagram Hiralal Pal College. Thanks to other departmental colleagues of Dhruba Halder College and Nabagram Hiralal Pal College. Thanks to Dr. Joydev Misro. Special thanks to Dr. Joydev Misro for organizing this webinar in a fantastic way. Thanks to Devkanti for he has not come in the forefront, but he has done a lot. Thanks to our Pagla Dasu, Somodi, he has also done a lot for this webinar. And my sincere thanks to all the participants who are in the audience.
Bishanda is also working hard since 3:30.
Bishan has actually come from Sovarani Memorial Girls College to Nabagram Hiralal Pal College.
That's why, that's why.
Sovarani Memorial College. Sovarani Memorial College to Nabagram Hiralal Pal College, and he has joined with us and he has done a lot also. Okay, thank you all. And, I think Joydev Misro will just end the session, the seminar, session of the seminar. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you all. Just before ending this national webinar, I just put a humble request to those participants who can't find themselves with the e-certificates. It's auto-generated. It's very simple. Just click on it and rightly filled up your details, especially email ID and the name, which automatically appear on your e-certificates. We are not doing anything manually here. If you can put up your information in a right way, there is no problem from our side to generate these e-certificates. We are waiting. We are releasing our respected speakers and conveners, principals, but we are still there. Take your time, keep yourself cool and fill it up. Nothing is impossible, and if still you can't, we are there to help you. So don't worry. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Joydev.
Yes,
thank you very much. Thank you once again to organizing committees, members of the organizing committee. Thank you. That has been a nice day.
Yeah, thanks to all of you
you.
for your patiently listening to entire duration. Thanks, Joydev.
Thank you, Devashish. Thank you. Okay. Vishanda. Oh, Vishanda.